Hey everybody, Oath and Pledge is powered by our friends at First Lead You Podcast. It's also supported by Buchanan Disability, Kubota of Chattanooga, Optimize You, the Vascular Institute of Chattanooga, Alchemy Med Spa, the Barn Nursery, Reagan Outdoor Advertising, and Our House Studios. Now, Oath and Pledge Podcast powered by First Lead You.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to do the same, and that I will obey.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one.
Welcome to Oath and Pledge, a podcast centered around our veterans. Through conversations, questions, and stories, we will address the topics that concern them and the public they protect. The transition out of the military, healthcare, relationships, mindsets, and more. This is Oath and Pledge. Hey everybody, welcome to Oath and Pledge Podcast. It is a podcast for veterans. My name's Clint Powell. I am not a veteran. But I was raised by one, have a lot of friends, and the reason we started this podcast is I thought it would be a good place for civilians and veterans and some military types to get together, talk about life, their time in the military, the lessons they learned, the transition out, through stories, personal stories, anecdotal stories. Plus, we've been fortunate enough for a majority of this podcast to have the support of the local VA. They're going to start sending us some guests again here soon, and thanks to Tracy and everybody over there. But what we normally do is we got a guest in the studio today, but we're going to go around the table. And my co-host, this is crazy. Last time I did a podcast, I had 3 cancellations within 30 minutes that morning. Hey, I can't do it. I got to go to court. I'm out of town. My dog ate my homework. And it was a great podcast. Josh was in here with me.
I showed up that day.
You did.
Yeah.
And
all right.
Today, everybody's shown up. It's like
glad.
the reason I did this is in case somebody wanted to back out. No, today we're all in studio. You're actually going to hear many voices. But let's go around before we welcome the guests. And the last half of this podcast, though, I sent these guys some questions that we're just going to run through. I think they're going to be fun questions. And our guest is going to play along with us. So, Jason,
he is.
Start off with us, man. Tell us what branch you served in, how long, and then we're just going to go around the table and do so everybody knows, first-time listeners know who they're listening to.
Yeah, Jason Smith, 5-year Army veteran infantryman, Purple Heart recipient.
Yeah, I'm Eric Buchanan. I was active duty Navy from 89 to 94, so 5 years, and I flew P-3s.
Josh Rowe, Marine Corps Reserve, 8 years, 91 to 99.
John Ballinger, 21 years aviation maintenance NCOIC. Last time on Black Hawk helicopters, medevac.
Well, don't tempt me with trying to bring up what's happened. I know exactly why he did that. I know exactly why John did. We're not going to do political
he did it
headlines.
last time.
I know.
He threw the grenade in the room last time we
We
were.
like to keep it spicy.
Absolutely.
He said something about Las Vegas. I don't know what he said.
We're not doing this. This is not a political headline podcast. I will say, though, you posted something and you tagged me on it like Clint would not understand this. That really frustrated me because I think I've written, Eric responded real quick.
I was
There's
just
a post.
clarifying with Eric in case he didn't understand.
Well, go ahead, John, since we brought it up before we welcome the guest. What was the post? There was a post you made about the training it takes to be an aviator versus a mechanic.
It was just a picture that actually came out of a room that I was in at one time where the aviation manuals were like stacked 3 feet high.
Right.
And there was this flight manual down here by itself.
Get on the mic for me.
Oh, there was this flight manual down by itself. And so
Right.
I was just illustrating to everyone the intelligence it takes to be a maintenance officer versus a pilot.
Well,
To which I responded, if you put the stick forward, the trees get bigger. You pull the stick back, the trees get smaller.
Yeah.
and then John said,
That's all I needed.
Isn't that page 1?
That's all I needed to know.
and John said Clint wouldn't understand, and I said that's not true. I rode the Alpine Slide here in Chattanooga, where it was the same concept: big ditch, concrete tunnels.
Yep.
Go forward, it gets big. Pull back, you're good. You know, it's whatever. All right, so we do have a special guest, and we're going to do what we normally do. We're going to ask him why he got in the military, what branch he served in, some lessons he may have learned. So my co-hosts are going to become kind of interviewers with me in this process the next 15 or 20 minutes.
Boy, are we ever.
Well, sounds like somebody knows him. John, why don't you do us a favor? Welcome the guest, and then guest, I'm going to let you tell everybody what branch you served in for how long, sir.
Well, we looked high and low, I'll say this, for someone that had been in the Air Force. And it took us a little bit. I mean, we've been doing this almost a year, and I finally remembered, oh, yeah, Jim Smith, good friend of mine, had worked for me in the past, and, you know, still a good friend and acquaintance. I thought, Jim Smith, an Air Force guy, let's see if he'll be brave enough to enter the room. And he is. He's here.
How you doing, Jim? I ain't scared. We're tough to find because it's a pretty select outfit. There's not a lot of us around.
Well, and they won't usually get up this early either. So.
Wow. Hey, do me a favor, Jim. Tell everybody how long you were in the Air Force, and then after you answer that, do me a favor. Tell us why you initially went into the military, the story behind that.
Okay. Yeah, I spent 24 years all total in the Air Force. I spent 12 years on active duty, made a decision to leave, missed flying, went back in the reserve for 12 more years. My initial entry into the Air Force, there was nothing glorious about it. It was about the opportunity to fly. And but as things happened, things came to pass, it took on a whole nother meaning. And it became something that was very personal. And the deeper I got into it, the more personal it got. You know, the lessons learned, you don't have enough time. A lot about myself, about my maturity, my leadership, and there were some hard fought lessons that came out of that. But wouldn't trade a day of it for anything.
What did you fly?
On active duty, I was a navigator, instructor navigator. We flew EC-135s on active duty. Looking Glass was our primary mission, the SAC, Strategic Air Command, and then United States Strategic Command Airborne Command Post. We got into some other really fun and interesting things beyond that as time went on. And then my time in the reserve, I was a KC-135 navigator. So I just did straight refueling.
Sure.
But a lot of fun. The EC-135 mission, when I got that assignment out of nav school, I wanted a B-52. I wanted to fly low and fast and blow stuff up, but I didn't want to be gone all the time. And everything came up buffs. And, man, on my assignment sheet, I had half a page on why I was the guy for B-52s. And when EC-135 came up, I was like, what? Because B-52s are a tough job, and they usually can't give those away. And I wanted one. So it was a little bit of a shock at assignment night when I had that. But the one redeeming thing about going to the EC was it was on continuous airborne alert. So I was going to be flying 2,000 hours a year. Yes. And en route to the assignment, I found out from a billeting clerk in Cheyenne, Wyoming, that they had taken the glass off 24-hour airborne alert that day. So there went my 2,000 hours a year. But it was an absolutely fascinating job. And then it morphed into some other conventional and unconventional applications for the airplane.
What was your commissioning source?
I was a 90-day wonder.
Okay.
I went through officer training school at Lackland Training Annex at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas.
Awesome.
All right, so there's going to be a little delay because me and Jim are sharing a mic, which is fine. Then some of this will be edited out. But I will ask, and this is, and you other three, please jump in. But you and Eric, I've seen videos, and I don't know if it's the same in every branch when it comes to aviators because I've been told to say aviators, not pilots. Eric's threatened me with physical violence. But my question is, so is it when you're revealed or you're given the plane, is it like being drafted? I've watched these videos where they come up and go, Clint Powell, you have the 1, 2, 3 ABC widget. And I'm like, yes. Or I'm like, yay, that's fantastic. Oh, damn. You know, is that the way it is? Is that the way it is with the Navy and the Air Force? And I'm going to hand the mic back to Jim.
So our assignment night, we had basically Las Vegas night, and we got a refrigerator box and made it into a slot machine, and all of the tumblers in it had letters and numbers for aircraft designations, and there was a couple of instructors inside the refrigerator box with the assignment list. So you put a coin in, you drop the coin in, we had a big lever on it, you pull the lever down, it'd spring back up, and the tumblers would start spinning. and it would come up with your assignment on it. And so they'd kind of mess with you, but then the coin would come back out with your base written on it. And so I went up, put my coin in, and waited for B52 to come up. And the tumbler stopped on EC 135, and yeah, it's funny. And I stood there for a minute, wait for him to start spinning again. And then I look up, and they got a slide up there with a map and a flag and Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. And my coin came out with Offutt Air Force Base, and I was in shock. This isn't a B-52 to Wurtsmith. And my wife was with me. I was the class leader for my my nav school class, and I escorted her back to her seat and went back to mine. And my buddy said, "Man, are you okay?" I said, "I don't know." And I even asked my wife, I said, "Do you know where we're going?" And she said, "Yeah, we're going to Omaha." Oh, okay, just complete shock. But to your point, it was the whole slot machine thing. So,
And who doesn't want to go to Omaha? I mean,
Your first
so Eric, is
real
that the way
assi-
it was for you?
No,
Okay.
absolutely not. So you've seen those videos where you see all the midshipmen at the Naval Academy or
Yeah.
the Army guys getting their assignments, and yeah, that they have that opportunity. For me, I had 2 times that happened. The middle of flight school, where they set you in different tracks, whether you're going to be jets, which is really land on aircraft carriers, so it includes some prop planes that have to be able to land on aircraft carriers. Fixed wing, which is this tiny little narrow category of people that are going to fly something that has fixed wings that's not land on aircraft carriers, and like 70% of the naval aviation group gets helicopters.
Right.
Well, you got to have certain grades to get jets, and so the Friday afternoon that the orders were supposed to come out, it was just a normal work day. We didn't go have a party at the officers club or something, and literally my wife and I went to the Pensacola Mall to relax, and we're walking around the mall because this is the late 80s, and you still went to the mall. And I had to call from a payphone to the officer of the day's desk, and whatever the petty officer answers the phone, he's got the list, and he goes through there. And going into that, I knew that I had the best grades of anybody who didn't get jet grades, and I had put down for fixed wing. But there was another woman in my class who had exactly the same grades. And I'm like, I'm going to get helicopters. I know I'm just going to be flying helicopters. That's okay. I can live on small ships, and I can fly helicopters. That's fine. And I called, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the petty officer looked on the list and said, "You got fixed wing." I was the one guy in my class that got fixed wing. So I'm okay. I'm going to go fly P3s. And then it was a total, like, when I got done with flight school and I got my wings, they didn't have our orders yet for where we were going to end up going. And so, like, we had 2 weeks of basically doing like desk work, and we were monitoring tests and like just what do they do with you when you're done with flight school and you're not ready to go somewhere else yet.
Yeah.
And then my orders came out and I was flying P3, but the orders came out, it was like, once again, I called the duty office and they, "Oh yeah, your orders are here, you can come pick them up." And okay, that's how I found out I was going to Jacksonville, Florida. No,
It's like-
no excitement whatsoever.
It's like the draft in the 70s for football and versus now. Back in the day, it was like, "Hey, did you know what happened yesterday? Somebody got..." And nowadays, it's the 12th pick of the 19th round has got a camera
the
in his
big
face.
excitement was when I got my orders saying I was going to Jacksonville, Florida to start flying P3s. The orders also included that I was going to have to stop at SEER school on the way and go up to Maine and go do survival school for a week and a half, and that my survival school was starting on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and so I was going to be driving up there, meaning leaving my family on Thanksgiving Day. Like, I finally got a break. I'm going to go home and see my family for 2 days, do Thanksgiving, and halfway through the Thanksgiving meal, I'm going to leave with my buddy. We're going to drive up to Maine, and spent the week and a half doing survival school in exactly the right temperature where it rained all day and froze all night. And you'd wake up in the morning, and everything be covered in ice, and everything was frozen over, and it would melt and get you sopping wet all over again. That was
I hate to break this to you, but I don't think the Army and the Marines right now are feeling. Look at Jason.
Listen,
I was actually
that-
looking for tissue.
One, I know your GT scores are higher than ours, and you have a higher budget. 2, they sat us crisscross applesauce on the floor and threw wadded piece of papers at us, and they're like, "Smith, Korea." I was like, "Oh, I didn't have any fun stories. I didn't get to go to a mall. Are you kidding me?" I was like, "This is ridiculous." It's
This
great
is
for you.
This is why I wanted to do the podcast right here. I'm going to
Budget,
fill out.
man.
You didn't pull a lever. You didn't.
They didn't have officers
Is that
inside the
code for
machine.
push-up? Listen, I
filling
got
out-
smoked one
filling out
time. 'Cause
coins.
We got smoked one time because the Lakers lost the playoff game. And he was like, "Everybody, total line. Only the rest move. Lakers lost." And he's like, "Gonna do push-ups. I'm tired." I'm like, "What is going on?
I didn't see a lot of.
Why me?"
I didn't see a lot of stuff coming from John G.
Yeah, very similar.
I have no story like that for sure. I think I knew where I was going the whole. I was a reservist in the '90s.
Yeah.
You knew what was going on.
I have a question. I wrote this down. Now, I wanted to start with Eric, and Jim, we're going to end with you on this in case you want to make up a lie. So here's the question. Eric, what was is it a flight name or your a Goose Iceman? What was your flight name again?
What was my call sign?
Call sign. Thank you very much.
The
Us
officers,
civilians.
I actually had two.
Okay.
The first one the officers gave me right when I got to the squadron. They called me Lumpy.
Okay.
After the kid from Leave It to Beaver.
Okay.
And then once I got pretty well known around the squadron, the enlisted guys called me Uncle Buck.
Okay. All right.
hilarious.
So before
Yeah.
we get to Jim and his call, do y'all have nicknames? Did y'all have nicknames?
No.
No nickname? You
yeah.
did? Okay.
You did.
Well, we're going to get to Jim. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
What was your nickname?
Hollywood.
Did you have a nickname?
I did
Not
not.
a nickname,
Josh?
it's a call sign.
Well,
Yeah.
nicknames.
I had a
Okay.
call sign.
He had a call sign. So you don't have a call sign as a Marine?
No.
Yeah.
No, they have nicknames.
Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
easy. Well, see.
But you're talking to me and John.
No, well, I haven't. I just want to point out something before I hand the mic back to Jim. You said no, Jason, but your body language said yes. I want you to know I'm calling on your bullshit right now.
Yeah, he had a bigger,
I
too big of a
was-
smile to really
I
be
was called a
no.
lot of derogatory names,
Okay.
but I didn't have anything that really stuck. There were a few that kept coming around.
I
Right?
just want to know when I said that, he goes no, but his head was yes, and he had a giant smile.
He
I
knew
just-
he knew this was PG-13.
I
so he
do.
he knew
I
the
like to
assignment.
hear. So a little background. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you're Navy or Air Force and you live on Army base, they pay you more because it's below living standards, right? So hearing
hilarious.
all these stories, I'm like, oh, this is awesome. It's like I
And
can,
they- and
enter, I
notice
can
that-
look through the window of an awesome house party, but I can't get in. So this is really cool.
And notice the Air Force is not even a question.
Yeah.
Air Force, they're never going to make you do that. They're just going to buy you a house in town and put you up in the Ritz Hotel.
Oh, yeah.
He mentioned Lackland. I did MP school at Lackland, and it was the best food I'd had anywhere on any base I've ever been on. Ever.
In their barracks, they have common areas, and then they have their own separate rooms. I had a hallway that I shared with one other guy. It was a tiny little 8x12 room.
The
So this is
best
weird.
BOQ I ever stayed in, Bachelor Officers Quarters, was actually the BEQ, the Bachelor Enlisted Quarters, in Thule, Greenland, because it was an Air Force base. There was a fireplace and a mini bar in my room.
Okay, hold on.
It's unfair.
I gotta
You
go.
four people are just hammering our poor guest who doesn't have a mic. I hogged the mic, and he's like, "Why the hell am I here? I'm getting roasted like I'm ready to fundraiser." So I'm
we
gonna let
haven't
you
started yet.
I'm gonna let you respond to all these comments. Did you have a call sign, sir?
I had one particular group that I worked with that I had an informal call sign nickname, but no, I didn't have anything that really stuck that they called me around the squadron or anything. So
Do you want to talk about the hell they've given you the last 5 minutes on your accommodations at all?
you know, it's what it's not easy being the first team. You know, everybody's coming for you.
Let me tell this story. So you know how the Air Force has such nice facilities is they're actually pretty smart about it. So when the Navy or the Army or the Marines build a base, the first thing they do is build the runways for the for the planes to land on, and then maybe build the facilities for the hangars and stuff. And then when they're close to being out of money, then they'll go build the bowling alley and the bachelor officers' quarters. Air Force goes out, the first thing they do is build the officers' club and the enlisted club. Then they build the bowling alley, and then they build like these other facilities. And when they've spent all that money, they go back to Congress and say, "We don't have money for a runway." Well, you got to have money for a runway for it to be an Air Force base, so they get all the money they want. Meanwhile, the Air Force, everybody else, the Navy and the Army is like, "Well, shit, we got crappy stuff, and we'd like to have something better." Well, yeah, but you spent all the money.
Crazy like a fox. There was a Navy guy that was offshore looking out his porthole over the thunderstorm, and I mean, the weather's terrible over there. You guys might have seen this. And the Navy guy's looking out from a ship, and he said, "Man, that looks like it sucks over there." And there's a grunt standing in a foxhole in his poncho, and the rain's dumping down on him. And it said, "Man, this sucks." And little ways away, there's a Marine in another foxhole saying, "Man, I love how this sucks." And then there's a special operator in another foxhole saying, "Man, I wish this had sucked some more." And then there's an Air Force guy and his lazy boy going, "What? No cable? This sucks."
This is a true story, Clint.
Okay.
I was next to an Air Force base station, which is common. There's an Army base and an Air Force base next to each other. And I was looking over to flight line at the Air Force, and there was a bunch of people in blue slacks and light blue shirts walking down the flight line. And I asked the NCO at that time, I was like, "What are they doing?" He said, "Oh, they're doing their PT test. They walk. They've got this. they gotta walk this in so much time." I was like, "What? In their slacks and their shirt?"
I got to be honest.
I want you to know the hate is not hate. It's that the saying is like they hate us because they ain't us, right? So that's kind of.
Gee, I don't know why we can't get
if we
more
had the
people
scores,
Force
right? If
people
we had the
to-
scores,
if we're not
we'd be
in
there
Air Force
too.
people?
Yeah. Between Jason, I don't know why we can't get more Air Force people in here.
No Air Force will ever come back.
Yeah.
Grand opening, grand closing. That's how this works. All right, I'm going to ask a serious question. We'll throw it back out there because John had alluded to, and then here in a minute we'll kind of switch gears towards the second half, had alluded to that you had done some pretty unique stuff. I'm anxious to hear about that, John. In a minute, I'm going to let you kind of bring that up. But before, you mentioned earlier that you got into the military, no big story behind that. But then when you got in there, it kind of took on some personal, it became different. And I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit, because you said once you got in, it took on a different meaning. And I don't know if that is you just gravitated to it. I don't know if it started really forming your life. Could you kind of expand on that? And when you're done, John, you can tell what he did unique, or because I'm
Well, some of it's
considering it a spy.
classified.
Well, wow. Let me hand the mic back to the classified over here. That's your new nickname, by the way.
Him and Sam Guthrie would have a good conversation with each other.
I'll continue on, sir.
Well, you know, when getting into it and finding the work that it took to excel, and the work that I found that I was willing and able to put in, you know, in flight school, and I'm sure you guys were the same, Eric. You counted your performance not in, but it was like, how many questions have you missed? It wasn't what's your academic average. It's how many questions have you missed? Like in a total of, you know, 11 academic classes, you know, you're looking at maybe missing a total of 7, 8, 10 questions out of that. It's super competitive, and understanding what it took to put the work in, and to compete at that level. But then, you know, getting into a unit and being responsible for stuff, whatever, you know, being part of a crew, being responsible for people. You going through, there was a professional military education school called Squadron Officer School for the Air Force. I'm sure you guys had something different. But there, when you really studied leadership, and they would challenge you, and you know, why are you marching, son? If you've ever heard the John Wayne thing, and it just made you think. But then when you get into the commitment and get into what we did, you know, you have to make a decision that you're playing for keeps, for yourself, for your family, and you know, at the risk of sounding corny, for your country, because at some level it all counts. And so, you know, stumbling upon things that I found made a difference to other people, made a difference to me. And then obviously I think 9/11 had an impact on all of us. You can't have a conversation about this kind of stuff without bringing that up, because it was such a game changer. And, you know, sitting home, well, I was actually on doing a week of annual tour when that happened, and watching that unfold and being in lockdown at the base that I was at, and then getting home that night and trying to explain that to my kids, and how we as a family were going to respond, what was going to be required of us. It took on just a much deeper role. So that's kind of talking around the barn, but
No, that's exactly what I wanted. And just so everybody knows, this is why I watch you guys when we have these podcasts. It's just like being a part of something else, whether it's a sport or it's an organization, but at such a different level. When I watch the body language in here goes from laughing and giving each other crap to when he starts talking about that personal reason, and then I watch everybody in here get real somber and just kind of, just through body language, acknowledging that that's the common ground no matter what branch you're in. That just, I love that. I'm sitting there watching everybody's face through here, and if y'all also look like y'all already start making fun of them again. But before that, it's that common ground. Now, let's move to the unique stuff the next 10 or 15. Is there classified stuff you're going to spill the beans on right now? Do you have stuff on Pete Hexus? Is there something happening right now that we need to know about?
He had to throw Pete in there, didn't he?
I love Pete. Yay, Pete. Go for it. What have you done, sir?
Well, the first flying job I had, Looking Glass, that was pretty cool. Part of the it was called the Post Attack Command and Control System, where if the balloon went up, there was the potential for our airplane to assume control of the U.S. strategic nuclear forces. So the idea behind that airplane was to be a redundant capability behind the underground command post in Omaha. If communications were lost or that were destroyed, that communication or that force management would revert to Looking Glass, which had been airborne at the time over the U.S. continuously for almost 30 years. And that, again, was a redundant capability.
Is that a lot of flight time?
Yeah, that's a lot of flight time.
295,000 continuous hours, I think the final total was.
That's crazy.
You might want to let people know that wasn't the same aircraft the whole time, refueling and having food brought up or something.
Those pilots were worn.
They started out when they were 20, they were done when they were 50, and then they got back to the ground.
That's like being the astronaut stuck in space, man. How long have we got going on this?
Man, don't
Yeah, when it was on continuous airborne, there was a 1, a 2, and a 3. And the 1 would take off at 6 in the morning. The 2 would take off at at 2 o'clock, and the 1 would land when the 2 got airborne and established on its orbit. And then the 3 would take off, and the 2 would recover when the 3 was established on its orbit. And that cycle continued for, like I said, for almost 30 years. The crews would fly a 1, then the next day they'd fly a 2, then they'd have a day off, and then the next day they'd fly a 3. And then when they came off that, they would go on alert for a week, and then they'd have a few days off. And that was just the cycle of life.
Can you tell what altitude they were flying at?
Mid-20s. Kind of between civilian traffic and the commercial air traffic, just to kind of stay out of the way. And maintained the communications links that were necessary to execute the mission. So that when that came off continuous airborne alert, they still flew Looking Glass, but it was just once a day on a random schedule. But then they still maintained an alert bird. So there was one Looking Glass mission on alert, and then another alternate mission that was on alert. So we had 2 aircraft on alert the entire time.
Alternate mission?
Yeah, that nothing exciting. It was.
I am a good listener, sir.
It was another radio relay kind of mission.
I'm no body language expert, but I've got this. I'm going to start getting. We'll circle back to that. Is that what I'm getting at? That's a very interesting point, Clint. Is that a no comment, sir? What's the alternate mission?
Yeah, that no comment, Clint.
I've never seen a man push a microphone away like that. You keep the mic. Anything you want to bring up on this at all? Anything else? Any stories you want to tell before we jump to the second half of this? Is there any questions you guys have before we go?
No, I'm just glad to have an Air Force guy in here finally.
Yeah.
I truly appreciate Jim coming in here and being a good sport.
Well, and real quick, I'm going to hand you the mic, but if you want to give me his contact information, I'm happy to add you in the rotation. If somebody ever backs out, I mean, just bring you in here because, the more the merrier.
Sure. Now, I got to say, I ain't scared, but I worked a lot with the Army when I was on active duty, and I loved working with the Army. But I was glad I was in the Air Force for many of the reasons you gentlemen have cited this morning. Now, one of the alternate missions that we got into was Airborne Command and Control we worked a lot with the 82nd Airborne Division and the 18th Airborne Corps. So we would take an airborne battle staff from either one of those units airborne, and during an airdrop, the commanding general would parachute in with whatever force we were supporting. The DCG would be on the airplane with the airborne battle staff. Once they had a ground CP established and got doing their Army thing on the ground, they would transfer control to the ground CP and we would go home. And then we did a similar kind of function for another unit that will remain nameless.
I think it's a bunch of crap. I wanted to hear about spy stuff. I wanted to hear some sort of gadget you had. I think the other one's the one I want to hear about. We'll quit recording in a minute, and then you can tell us. I know you won't. But real quick, can you do me a favor? Can you explain the difference, the plane you wanted to fly versus the one you ended up flying? Because everyone in here was nodding, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It could have been a balloon. I have no idea. What's the difference in what you wanted versus what you got?
Okay. So my first choice on my dream sheet for an assignment was a B-52 bomber. Right. So B-52 is a humongous 225-foot wingspan, 8-engine bomber that had dual roles. Yeah, it would drop nukes, but it also went low level, which I kind of grooved on, dropping conventional bombs on things, but has been kind of an enforcer around the world for a long time. The first Buff started flying in mid to late 50s, and the last B-52 pilot hasn't been born yet. So very impressive airplane, but a very different mission than what I got into with the EC-35. EC-135 was a command and control communications platform. It was based on a KC-135 airframe, but we had about 30 tons of communications gear on the airplane. We had some of the models had Milstar, a steerable antenna, EHF satellite communication system. We had AFSATCOM. We had UHF, VHF, HF, LF, VLF.
Is it a 707 that was the original airframe for a KC-135?
The 707 is actually a little bigger, but a little more narrow. The KC-135 was designed from the ground up to do what it does, but it's based on a 707 design. Yeah. So, and then the LF, I guess the cool communication thing everybody's amazed to hear about was our VLF radio system. We had a trailing wire antenna that, depending on what we were doing, would extend about 5 miles behind the airplane. The Navy E6, the TACAMO that took over the mission for the EC-135 has the same system. But that big, huge, low-frequency wave we could use to talk to people that were in places that would be difficult to talk to, like a missile silo or a submarine.
How do I lose cell service just going down in Ottawa?
Because you're not dragging 5 miles of antenna behind your car.
I need one of those.
The first question I can answer is a non-veteran you took from me, Eric. I could explain that one. I know exactly why you couldn't do that. All right, so let's do this. If you're comfortable with it, Jim, I sent these guys some questions last night, and we're going to spend the next little bit going through some questions and topics. Are you comfortable joining in with us? All right, here we go. First of all, let's take just a few minutes. And, John, I'm going to let you take the next 4 or 5 minutes on this one. How is the VA experience going? And First Lead You podcast we have coming up. And then we might actually ask if anybody's got some questions for Josh about Vietnam trip. But
yeah, the VA process is a learning experience for me because each time I go into the facility, I get a little PTSD from MEPS because it's just different going back in there after literally decades. I spoke on the last podcast about probably the herd mentality of just getting through there and not listening as well. I've got my next appointment's on February the 25th to go back and try to communicate a little bit deeper on injuries and things like that. So, but by and large, I would encourage any veteran that's not gone to the facility to go to the facility. It's state of the art. They do care. I just think there's such an overwhelming response to the one in Chattanooga that there is that you feel like a little MEPS when you go through there. So, but
we'll tell the audience what a MEPS is.
I just went, Everyone out there that was in the veteran just went like this.
Well,
yeah,
anybody that's been to MEPS knows the sound of a latex glove being popped.
I'm over 50. I know that sound.
Military entrance processing station. So that's where you go to get your physical. They determine whether you have flat feet or any medical issue, all the physical, the entrance, as far as processing. So you go to that initially, and then it's the place that you leave from. I left in the Army. They put me in a hotel the night before, and I went to MEPS and got on a bus and left that duty state or left MEPS and went to McGee Tyson Airport to jump on an airplane to go to Atlanta, and from Atlanta to Newark, New Jersey to Fort Dix.
But that's not recently. You've not done any of that recently, correct, sir? Because if so, the VA's really thorough, dude. They're really killing
No,
it
it's
right
been a little bit since that happened. But
I was getting ready to say, that's been a minute.
And then for First Lead You,
Yeah.
we're actually starting season 3. Season 3's actually been laid out, but our first episodes are going to be with a ketamine treatment specialist, a brain training specialist, and then myself. And the illustration that we're going to use is most people's brains, through whether it's trauma or things that happen early in their life, earlier in their childhood, could be things that happen in the military. The way we're describing it is your brain has neurons in it, and those neurons are pathways. And when something happens, it has a roadblock in it.
Yeah.
And so depending on who gets you when you're talking about that, the way that the ketamine specialist talked about it is he gets it when the car has iced over windows. His job is to unfog the windows. My job is to get the car moving on the pathway again.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question about this, and I'm by the way, thanks for First Lead You. You're one of the sponsors of this podcast. Our friends at Kubota of Chattanooga have come on as well. Coralie over there, because I've known her for a long time. But didn't you buy some equipment from Kubota of Chattanooga too? You look all silent over there.
How'd you know that?
Because you told me.
Oh,
Yeah, last time you were in, man, you need some ketamine. Get your
Resources.
He's been
Hold on
following you
now.
around.
That's
Dang.
I forgot my
By the way,
sources.
you need new curtains. No,
plants need watering by your bedroom window.
no. So ketamine. I've got a buddy that you probably know of, heard of, who's done 70 ketamine treatments, and he has told me, his guy, and I'm curious. Have you already had this conversation with your? I'm curious because he's been told that if you have bad PTSD or if you have bad, it can be not a good trip, air quote trip.
Yep.
And because I was going to do that for someone I know very well, and they were like, some monsters you need to face and some monsters need to stay silent. And so I'm interested to hear that conversation.
The
you're
VA
having.
actually pays for ketamine treatments for veterans. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm anxious to hear that conversation.
Visit my VA more often.
Yes.
Yeah, but he's going to be on the podcast.
Yeah.
Brain training specialist is going to be on the podcast.
Okay.
We'll be on there talking about the mechanics of how to move the car forward after you get the windows unfogged.
Perfect. I can't wait to listen. Now, the last episode we had, when people that have real jobs like you guys do kind of had to go actually do the real jobs. I had
I have a
Josh.
real job.
But your job was to talk to me.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Your job. This is the cool thing about Josh. He is locally, because a lot of people may not live actually around this area. He's also a TV news anchor, but he has this.
Boo.
No, I think you're good. No, we're
Right.
good.
Okay.
But you also have this side. I don't want to call it a gig, but you have this passion for stories of veterans.
Yep.
It's on YouTube. I want to make sure everybody knows where they can find it. But you took a trip to Vietnam for 6 days with a special purpose. Can you thumbnail tell everybody what that was for again? Why you went to Vietnam for
Yep.
that? And
Well-
then, real quick, if guys had questions because y'all weren't here, feel free to ask.
Sure, sure. Twofold, but the biggest one was to go with a family of Medal of Honor recipient from the Vietnam War. Rodney Maxwell Davis, Sergeant Davis, was killed in action September 6th of 1967. He jumped on a grenade and saved 5 Marines' lives. Killed instantly. And we went to the location. They were able to map the exact location where this happened. So we're in this little village in the Quezon Son Valley in Vietnam, and it was very emotional. And I mean, I've never seen anything like it. It was powerful, to say the least. So that was the biggest reason we were there. But also while we were there, went with this gentleman named Nick War. Nick War wrote a book called Phase Line Green about the Battle of Waste City, and so I went to Waste City with him, and that story is a fascinating ride as well, as far as just the way wars are fought and the ways they should be fought and how often they're not fought that way. And because a few weeks ago, I had a chance to interview Lucky Luckadoo, who is the last living member of the Bloody 100th, who is still living, 102 years old. Guy walks in a room, 102 years old. A man commands a room. He is in charge of everything, and he's a bad dude. And
I just got his book. Damn Lucky.
Damn Lucky.
I saw that. I saw that episode. Picked up that book.
I bet, yeah.
It's sitting by my bed.
Yeah. So the story with him is that he got to Europe in 43, and so for a year before D-Day, they're bombing everything that they can, and a lot of those guys died, and it was some dangerous stuff. But
it's that what is that? The new movie that's like Band of Brothers. It's Masters of the Air.
Masters of the Air.
Masters of the Air is based on them, right?
It's based on a group of pilots that he flew with.
Yeah,
he knew those
yeah,
guys.
it's his group. Yeah,
Yeah. And there's a documentary, kind of a companion documentary that he's in as well that Tom Hanks narrates and all that stuff. And so his story is phenomenal. But the point I was making was before D-Day, for a year, they bombed everything they could. So when the ground troops got there, it's a lot of pre-work done. Waste City, it is an old historic a city with all these historic buildings. They compared it to, like, Washington, D.C. with the monuments and whatnot. They wouldn't let them use artillery. They wouldn't let them use their tanks. They basically just sent humans into buildings with no kind of pre-anything. And so a lot of
it's the Hue City is the historic capital of Vietnam.
Well, right. So it's like the intellectual hub, more or less. But you're right.
At one time, it had been the capital.
Yeah.
And back in the day, and it's what had all the ancient monuments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also a big hub for the Buddhist pagodas and those kind of things. So just a big. It meant a lot to the people of that country. So they weren't allowed to use artillery. Pre-bomb anything, so they basically went in there, and a lot of Marines got killed. And the way Nick explains it is they prioritized buildings over Marines' lives and
the rules of engagement. Stuff.
Absolutely. So that trip was just. I mean, I could talk all day about it.
Do y'all have questions?
I do.
Oh yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Let me
How-
turn the mic back over here.
How were you received over there? 60 years removed.
Awesome.
Is there any, really?
They were very sweet, just nice people, and we actually, I was in a meeting with a couple of Vietnam veterans and some veterans since then, with NVA veterans as well, and sat there and they talked some things out. And there's a lot of things they're still dealing with from the war, from unexploded ordnances to Agent Orange exposure for them. Obviously, they're in that country, and so there's a lot of that. Missing soldiers, they helped our country find a lot of our missing troops from the war before anybody helped them find theirs. They still have way more than we do, as far as they still don't know what happened to them. Record keeping and these kind of things as well. But yeah, overall, they could have been nicer to us. Now, I've talked to other veterans who went to other parts of the country. We were in Da Nang, Waste City, that kind of area. I talked to a friend of mine who went to Saigon about 5 years before I went, and he said it wasn't as nice. And so it probably depends on your experience, but we were treated very well.
So I had my first commanding officer when I was in ROTC had been at Khe Sanh. I got some stories from him, and the guy I went to church with was both at Khe Sanh and Hue City, and I've got these images in my mind. And then the Marine Corps Museum, there's a whole thing about about Khe Sanh that actually has my former CO's. He's mentioned in there. What's it look like today in terms of Khe Sanh? Can you actually tell there was once a Marine air base there? And
So there's Khe Sanh that we think of, KHESAHN, and then the Khe Sanh Valley, which is QUESON, which is south of Vietnam. Okay. And I may be messing up the pronunciations probably because obviously I don't speak Vietnamese. But that said, so there are different places. We didn't go to the base you're thinking of. The valley is south of Da Nang. It's where Operation Swift happened and several other big battles were around then. So I wish I knew more than.
And what does Hue City look like? Can you tell there was a battle that fought there, or has
no,
it been fixed up?
It's a beautiful city.
All the historic buildings look nice again. That kind of stuff.
Everything we saw looked very it preserved very well. You look at video from that time, and it's a great point because you wonder how did they do that. But yeah, a lot of those historic buildings have been repaired, and a lot of the cities went to Da Nang and Hue City. They're very modern. Now they're not like Dallas, but they're very modern.
They're no East Ridge.
Exactly.
I understand. But look, the giggles around the room. That's a local. Yeah. So, but my question is, and I live there, by the way. Shout out
to a floodplain?
It's all in a floodplain.
Oh no,
flooded with checking the cash places and tattoo places, which are all my friends. Quick question though, comment, and then you can expand on it. We'll move on, but. Unless somebody else has another question. You had mentioned, though, that you were in places where there's still craters, and it's weird because you said you were looking out over this vista where the wars were, but there's still remnants there of war, even though it was kind of odd for you. That's how you had explained it a little bit, right?
I mean, it was eye-opening because, I mean, like I said, we're in Da Nang, which is a pretty modern city, although you can't drink the water, and there's a lot of things that aren't as modern, but definitely modernized from what you would think. When we see Vietnam in anything these days, you know, it's a war movie from the '60s, and so
We
a lot
talked about that.
yeah, and so a lot of
Movies
our
from the '80s is how I was introduced to Vietnam.
yeah,
other
so
than my dad.
a lot of our references. I mean, what one of the veterans said to me: Vietnam's a country, not a war. You know, and that's the thing that we should probably all think about differently. You know, as far as that goes, because there's a lot more to it than just this war that happened 50 years ago. But yes, so where Rodney Davis was killed in action was in a giant bomb crater, probably a 2,000-pound bomb that was dropped there prior. I don't know when, but prior to that battle. And that crater is still there. And if you read, there's a book written about him. If you read about it, obviously the battle was awful. But that there's a scene that he talks about where basically the entire bottom of the crater is just crimson from just because they got hit pretty hard. So yeah.
Was it?
No.
Was it eerie? So I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to Korea. I saw a little bit of remnants of the Korean War. But was it eerie to still see the scars from battle?
You know, it was one of those things of yes and no. That where that took place is this little bitty farming village, and so we took a bus, and then you're on these little bitty cars, and they take you back in these little alleys, and you're like, don't even know where the heck you are, and then you get out, and you're in the middle of this agricultural area, so it's a big rice paddy, right? And so so that looks a lot more like what you're might think of when you think of Vietnam. And so when we're at the bomb crater, I don't think we realized what it was until we got right in it, And so in that moment, it's like, oh wow. Yeah. And then you get in there, and there was a ceremony, so they start telling a little bit more of the history of it. And so it's definitely heavy and emotional, but also at the same time, it's difficult to really put yourself, as you know better than probably anybody, what real deal, boots on the ground combat looks like, right? And so it's really hard to imagine that, but you understand this. I mean, because it's a giant bomb crater, so it's not like it's a trench, right, where or a foxhole they dug out. It's probably 10 feet, so they got to climb out of it even to shoot over the edge of it. And that was part of the problem. So how he got killed was they were in this bomb crater, and fighting's heavy. They're throwing grenades, and so they're timing it. Grenade drops in, as you know, it mushrooms out, right? So you got a little bit of time. If you can get out of the crater and onto the edge, you can escape the blast, and that's what they were doing. They were timing it. Well, at some point, two come at the same time, one where they were jumping and one where they were standing. And so they were hosed. And one of the grandson of one of the guys who was there, whose lives Davis that saved, he said that his grandfather would tell the story of how he knew it was about to go off, and he was like basically bracing for it to happen. And when he does this, he sees Davis kind of jump on it at the same time. And you can't see what I'm doing, but basically he had his hands out like he was trying to brace from a blast, and then looks over and realizes. And then people who didn't see it heard it and said that they could tell from the way it sounded that it did not sound like the other grenades that had gone off. And so they knew something had happened, and they look back and, yeah.
All of the stories that it brings to mind for me are a little more lighthearted and just don't carry the gravity of something like that. But when you talked about the feeling of that, I did an exercise in Thailand in, I think, 93, and flying around Vietnam and looking up, from altitude, looking up the Mekong Delta was like walking past a haunted house. All the stories that I know and am familiar with are all from the air side.
Yeah.
And the face-to-face grunt side, like you're talking about, that's a whole nother complexion.
It's interesting you talk about the air side. I interviewed a man last night named Kit Smith who flew F-8s, and he was in the first mission into Hanoi, and one of the few that survived that mission. And they bombed a power plant there, and the air side of the Vietnam War you don't hear a lot about. Not as much as you hear the ground side of that. And he talked about how that mission into Hanoi, nobody reported about it because they had reporters on the ground. They didn't have reporters with them on a bombing mission or whatever. And so, and it was in the north, so the ground troops were on the south. And so, yeah, the air part of Vietnam, I think is less understood than a lot of, whether it be, the the bigger battles and bigger places versus is the deltas and Waste City and these kind of battles we hear about.
The only thing that I can't add anything to that other than that the Vietnam War was the originator for Dust Off, which is the call sign for medevac. And when they started doing it, it stands for Dedicated Unselfish Service to Our Fighting Forces. And the reason they called it Dust Off is because when that Huey would come in, it would clear the dust off with prop wash on the ground. But when you fly dust off, I guess my last 7 years were, it's humbling because you're in an aircraft with no weaponry on it, going into places where everybody has weapons, and the Geneva Convention says you can't fire on something with Red Cross on it, but nobody abides by that.
Right.
But dust off came out of the Vietnam War.
So when you had this, I brought it up to Josh, and then we'll move on and wrap this one up. I brought it up. One of the disservices, and I go back to my history, and Eric and I do a constitutional podcast, and he's kind of treating me like his student, the stuff I should have learned. And to be honest with you, a lot of stuff we just don't have time to teach in schools because Eric's going line by line through the Constitution with us.
106 episodes.
110
episodes so far. So we're maybe halfway done.
And it's literally
You
word by
don't
word.
learn it like that in law school.
No, it's word by word. It's fantastic. And his main goal is to make me look stupid. He goes, so Clinton, 1832, what did John Smith say to Bob? Was it and or the? And I'm like, damn well I don't know that. I'm from East Ridge, PhD of Waffle House. Come on now, back up. But it's really fun. But the reason I bring that up is sometimes my exposure to the Vietnam War was, of course, my dad was there, but he only shared stories with me as I started getting older and could handle the stories. But also, we talked about this, movies. The Rambos and the MIAs with Chuck Norris, and then every now and then the Apocalypse Now, or Deer, I can't remember.
The Deer Hunter.
Deer Hunter, yeah.
Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, Full Metal Jacket, those type of movies, and some were accurate. And here's how I knew the ones that were accurate, like Platoon stuff. The ones my dad wouldn't watch.
Yeah.
We would watch Rambo all day long. Man, he could watch Chuck Norris, bring it on. The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, no thank you. And I've seen him 15, 20 minutes in. He's like, I'm going to go get some popcorn. You want some popcorn, man? I'm like, no, you want to watch Raw or WWE or something, Dad? He's like, yeah, let's change the channel. So my point on all that is.
And I'll tell you, Full Metal Jacket, the first 8 minutes, it'll make you cringe. Even though that was my drill sergeant, Bird, from Kingsport, Tennessee. He was that guy, but it was spot on. And to this day, when it goes through it, especially if somebody's around me, I'm like, God, you don't want to.
Real quick, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, go to YouTube and watch young people's first reactions to that scene. And you can tell who's been raised one way versus the other. Because there's some people that go, that's my dad. Or that's what you need. And then there's people like, that is ridiculous to treat human beings that way. And I go, no, I want them that way. I want them pissed off and callous because they're about to do evil shit for me so I can live under this blanket of freedom, man. I need them to be treated that way. All right, let's do this as we wrap this one up. We're not going to spend as much time. I'm going to skip over some of these. And so everybody doesn't have to participate. We don't have to do a show of hands. But the next 10 minutes, here's what we're going to do. The best prank. These are questions I have. This is going to end up on a light note. The best prank you either pulled or saw pulled in the military. Does anybody have one that comes to mind? Okay, Eric.
Yeah,
do you have one, Jim? You just got this mic, but Eric, you go first.
So this gives a little. In a Navy squadron, the junior officers, the ensigns, lieutenant JGs, and lieutenants, kind of all get along together. Don't even call each other sir, salute, or anything. And then the lieutenant commanders kind of get sort of drawn into that a little bit, where we can pick on them. Get a brand new lieutenant commander, and he screwed up his first day. He was so nervous, or just I don't know what happened, but he shows up in the squadron without his rank insignia on his uniform. Everybody could kind of what are you, a chief or whatever? So we knew right away that he was a little slow or something. We didn't know quite what he was. So the next 2 days later, he's supposed to have his fitness report, which is the annual review that you have with your commanding officer. But he was so new to the squadron that it wasn't going to be an official one, but he still had to meet with the commanding officer. So two of my buddies, one of them a former Navy SEAL, took him out drinking the night before his fit rep at 07:30 the next morning. And they took him out into town, and they had arranged for the bartender at this little place off base to get, after the first 2 or 3 tequila shots, they were drinking water, and he was still drinking tequila. So they fed this lieutenant commander 13, 14 shots of tequila. I don't know what it was by the time the night was over. They take him back to his BOQ. They unplug his alarm clock. They put him into bed. And they arranged for the duty driver to pick him up at 07:15 the next morning. And then they go over his uniforms hanging there in the back of the door, so it's ready to go. And they took his ribbons and put them on the other side, and his wings on the other side, and turned his rank insignia upside down. Turned his rank insignia upside down on his hat. And so when at 7:15, there's banging on the door, and it's like, third class petty officer, like supposed to be the duty driver, has to wake him up. And they he finally wakes him up. He's only been asleep maybe for 3 hours. Wake him up. He throws his uniform on. He gets to the CO's office late, comes in, stands there at attention. The CO looks at him. I'm not going to say his name because it's too embarrassing, but says his first name and says, "Do you want to go back to bed?" Takes one look at him and just sends him back to bed.
This isn't a prank. This is true, but it turned into a prank probably 8-9 hours later. First day of basic training, Private Mooney rolls over when the drill sergeant's in there with a trash can getting everybody up and asks him for 15 more minutes. It's a true story. He said, "Can we have 15 more minutes?" The next thing that happens is his wall locker and his foot locker all goes out the third floor window. Everything goes out the third floor window and lands on the ground. And Private Mooney, one item at a time, has to go up 3 floors and bring that wall locker and that foot locker back. When I say one item, one shoestring, one insignia, I mean one at a time. We left that morning at 5. We come back that night 11. Private Mooney's still going up and down those stairs. Yeah.
Wow.
All right, Jim, it's on you.
Mine are kind of weak. I had a couple done to me and probably returned the favor once or twice. We'll do the alert prank. I was on alert one time. You living in the squadron in alert. I shared a room with the co-pilot, and I was in bed one night, and water came dripping down on my head. I'm like, damn. So I get up and reposition the bed, or reposition myself. Water starts dripping again on the bed. So I pull the bed away, and now it's just dripping, making splashing on the carpet. So I grabbed a pillow and a blanket, and I went out to the TV room and got in one of the lazy boys and went to sleep. And a year later, I was on alert. We were at the BX eating lunch one day, and they were sitting there talking to a couple of the in-flight maintenance technicians that always flew with us. They were in the room next door, and we got to talking about stuff, and I told them about the water dripping on my head one night, just talking about alert stories, and they kind of glance at each other and smirk. That was you guys. You did it. They had run a hose up over the ceiling tiles and brought it down over the head of one of the beds in there, which happened to be my bed that night, and they were spitting water through there. So, yeah.
That's a good one, though. That's a real good. You got something, Jason? You going to share anything? No?
Yeah. All right. So there was a soldier. We all know a soldier, right? That just shouldn't be there. Doesn't do the right things ever. We had a guy, I won't say his name, but he thought it was smart to walk around with an AT-4, which is essentially like, a bazooka or whatever, for close quarters combat. And we're like, well, what if they're 5 feet away from you? You're going to blow yourself up. He just kept making these bad decisions. He's the kind of guy that worked at the USO, and he would unplug the internet if he didn't want to do his job. And he was just very lazy. And you got to think about the family members that were trying to reach their soldiers trying to reach family members. One day we were pulling security in Afghanistan, and he was standing on a rooftop with an iPod in his ears singing this Usher song. And I'm looking at all my buddies. I'm like, it'd be really funny if we just acted like we took contact, right? And we'd all just dove down really quick and grabbed our gear. And he's just sitting here, one leg propped up on like a 2-foot wall, just blurting out this music. So we just go 3, 2, 1. We all just jump and dive. He freaks out. He throws himself almost off the roof. And we're all laughing at him, right? And he's like, man, that ain't funny, dude. Why you do that, man? And it's like he cleared up a little bit for about a week, but it was just the same stuff over and over with that guy.
See, That's way cleaner than the other stuff you could have told. Good job.
I was debating
man.
if it was even worth telling because
No, it
so
was
much
very
better.
good. It was all PG. Do you got anything you want to share?
Nothing like those.
Okay.
No.
He kept the name silent. I said the name, so I shouldn't.
Do I
done
need to
that
pull
shit.
mine
I'll
out?
never forget the name.
Okay. I need to pull that name out. Okay, good. I'll leave it in. All right. We're going to go around real quick, and I'm going to ask a few of these. By the way, does anybody in here, do you have a favorite firearm for home protection? That's one I was asking. Do you have a favorite?
Mossberg shotgun.
I mean, yeah, I'm not even in the military. Get sawed-off pistol grip?
Oh yeah, 12-inch barrel.
Yep. Okay. All
There's
right.
nothing but there's no better home defense, in my opinion, than hearing
Yep.
with a red dot on it because it's got a red dot on it.
you got
too.
the red dot.
Oh yeah, I got a red dot.
I don't have the red dot. You got some, Josh? Do you have a home defense weapon at all?
Well, I was an MP, so I always had a 9mm the whole time
Oh.
I was in. So that's what I've always had.
You were an MP?
Yeah.
Well, we got to come back next time we do this. We got to have stories of
They're not very good. A few of closing down the bar at 29 Palms, California, when there's nothing to do and nowhere to go, and you say you have to go home, and nobody wants to go home. Those are fun days, but other than that, nothing much. Stand at a lot of gates and just waving a lot of folks through, and say, yeah, your ID's old. You have to go to see the.
Eric, you got a favorite firearm?
I got a 45 Kimber at home. That was one of my first splurges when I was making enough money as an attorney to actually afford to get something decent. And then I got a 9mm at my office.
Last year.
What'd you say?
Last year.
You got one? What's your favorite?
I just use a SIG 320, but you have a shotgun. Absolutely. If I mean, you can go into all about home defense, but it take forever.
Look at his.
But as long as,
did he
as,
go
long
to
as your
different
family
places?
I
goes
think so.
where their designated area is when there's an intruder,
Yeah.
blast away. Because the
Yeah.
last thing you want to do is shoot when
Well, I
there's
used to tell
somebody
everybody,
you
stay in
care
your
about
rooms.
on the wall.
I'd
On that
tell
wall
everybody
that you're shooting at. Yeah.
I would tell everybody at the house when I had in my family, of course, stay in the rooms. Just stay where you're at.
I feel like if I go to Jason's, I got to look for tripwires or something. I
Oh
don't
man,
know.
I'm gnarly. When my wife isn't there,
You
when
do.
my wife and my
bungee
children
sticks out
aren't
there?
there, right, and I'm home alone,
Yeah.
PTSD is kicking. I'm telling you, I've got my wheelchair in front of the door. The door's locked. I have a rollout plan. I know which roll I'm rolling, what
You have
weapon I have.
You have the rope going out the windows. I used to
dude.
have that for my kids.
I'm looking for
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, that's
All right.
a little much.
You got
That's
a
how I know
favorite
I'm
one,
still
Jim?
struggling.
9 and my dog. Hopefully my dog. I've got a golden doodle, a miniature golden doodle. He can get kind of wired up. So.
Take the microphone back.
Hey, I got poodles.
Can I
man,
just say?
so I got nothing
Can I
to
just say Air Force?
My bad. I set you up for that one. That's my bad, man.
You need like a soundboard.
Did he say a Doberman poodle?
He said a golden doodle, a miniature golden doodle.
I'm gonna make you feel better, Jim. I'm gonna get one of my buddies to come in here. I brought this up before. He is an Air Force guy, and I'm gonna get him to come in, and I cannot wait because he has, and I brought him up before. His name's Andy. I won't give his last name, but he has one of the highest security clearances you can get in the world. So there's, I mean, it is a handful of people. He works for the government. Well, he is a third party now, but he was in the Air Force for I think 10 or 11 years. The reason I want him in here is one, I want to talk the security aspect from online. It's crazy, it's silly, and it's terrifying. He deals in that world every day of his life. But the other side of it is when he was in the Air Force, he spent a lot of time with MPs.
Mm-hmm.
So the stories, I think he is, and I've said this before, I think he's either an Army or a Marine or something trapped in the Air Force body because he cracked a few heads when someone would flirt with a girlfriend. He spent some time in the company of the MPs. And so his story, though, when he shares it, is fascinating. It's a good story. So when we listen again, he's the kind of guy that will, when y'all start giving him grief, he'll just sit there and smile, and he will give it right back. You've been very nice. You've been a very kind guest. I've been actually sitting closer to you just so I could be in support. Like, hi, my name's Jim, and I'm in the Air Force. Hi, Jim. I'm your sponsor today, Jim. Man, I appreciate you coming in, buddy.
I've enjoyed it. I'm not scared, and I know who they're going to call when they need a close air support mission or they need a ride to the fight. They're going to call me.
John, thanks for bringing him in, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim, for
Guys, yeah, and I thank y'all for being flexible today. It was a little bit of we had a full room and we kind of bounced back and forth, but you guys are always great. I think a majority of this conversation today, as I wrap this up, was exactly what I expect and I want from this podcast. Some of this was less of me and just more of y'all doing y'all's thing, and I think this is what's needed. The stories are fantastic, but this kind of stuff, I think it's good for us civilians to see because it's bigger than sometimes the headlines present.
If I could finish it with this, when
Yep.
people ask the question, do you miss being in the military? The overwhelming response is, I don't miss it, but I do miss the people.
Yeah.
And sitting in this room, you could feel that.
Yeah. And not only that, this is probably the only place now that we can get together with different branches and have what we have right here, right? In the middle, when you're in, it's like, oh, go Army, go Navy, go Air Force, whatever, right? But when you're out, you realize you're all brothers and sisters. And this is extremely rare. So, Clint, thank you so much
Yeah,
for allowing
thanks a lot.
this to happen.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
I'm learning a lot. So,
Yeah, it's good stuff. Everybody check out all the sponsors. Check out the stuff you've listened to, Josh's stuff, Eric's podcast, John's podcast. And don't visit Jason's house when his family's not there. For the love of God.
it gets weird on the farm.